Over the vast soybean fields of Smile, Montana, one of the most productive regions in American agribusiness, stretched the golden expanses of the New Dawn Farm, owned by the Mendonça family. Fernanda Mendonça stood on the porch of her home, a simple yet comfortable structure that held the memories of her childhood. At 35, her face bore subtle marks of someone who understood the meaning of hard work and perseverance. Her brown hair, usually tied in a careless bun, danced in the morning breeze as she sipped her coffee. "Mom, the tractors are ready for harvest." "In the east sector," Fernanda said, walking into the kitchen where Louisa, a 65-year-old woman, was preparing breakfast for the workers. "Don't you ever rest, my dear?" Louisa replied, drying her hands on her apron. "Ever since your father passed, you've been carrying the world on your shoulders." Fernanda smiled tenderly. Her father, Antonio Mendonça, had left this world 5 years ago, a victim of a sudden illness that deeply shook the family. Before his passing, New Dawn Farm was just a modest property. Now, under Fernanda's management, it had become one of the largest grain producers in the region. "Someone has to keep the business running, Mom," she replied, quickly checking notifications on her phone. "And today we have that meeting with the investors from Chicago." Louisa sighed, recognizing in her daughter the same determination she had seen in her husband for decades. Fernanda had studied agronomy and business administration, returning to the farm with innovative ideas and a strategic vision that revolutionized production. They diversified crops, implemented efficient irrigation systems, and adopted technologies that multiplied productivity. The morning passed as usual on the farm. Fernanda walked through the fields, spoke with the workers, checked the machinery, and noted important details on her tablet. Her dedication was admired by all, and her technical knowledge was unquestionable. Around noon, she returned home to prepare for the meeting in Billings. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" Louisa asked, helping her daughter pick out an outfit for the meeting. "No need, Mom. It's just a meeting with the bank to discuss some investment options. Nothing major." Fernanda opted for a discreet look, high-quality jeans, a white cotton shirt, and a simple blazer. She wasn't one for dressing up, preferring comfort and practicality. Her only accessories were a family heirloom watch and a small emerald pendant that had belonged to her grandmother. During the 2-hour drive to Billings, Fernanda made a few calls to handle farm matters and mentally reviewed the numbers she planned to present at the bank. After years of consistent work, New Dawn Farm had generated considerable capital, and she decided it was time to diversify investments to ensure long-term financial stability. The National Progress Bank was an imposing building in Billings' financial district. With its mirrored facade and visible security, it symbolized the power and wealth within its walls. Fernanda parked her Jeep, a sturdy and functional vehicle preferred for the dirt roads of the region, among luxury cars that looked freshly driven, off dealership lots. As she entered the main lobby, she immediately felt the curious glances of the employees. Her simple attire stood out in the formal environment, where men in suits and women in tailored outfits moved with apparent importance. She approached the reception desk with confidence. "Good morning, I have a meeting scheduled with the investment department. My name is Fernanda Mendonça." The receptionist, a young woman with an impeccable appearance, looked her up and down before checking the system. "Ah yes, Miss Mendonça. Mr. Gustavo Aragon will see you." "Please wait a moment." Fernanda nodded and sat in one of the lobby chairs. As she waited, she observed the bank's activity, the hurried people, the tense atmosphere of importance hanging in the air. It was a different world from hers, where value was measured by numbers on computer screens, not by crops and harvests. After 20 minutes of waiting, a man around 40, wearing an impeccably tailored suit, approached with a tablet in hand. "Miss Mendonça?" he asked with a slightly impatient tone. "I'm Gustavo Aragon, investment manager. Please follow me." Fernanda followed him to a meeting room on the 3rd floor. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, and the central table, made of fine wood, was impeccably polished. Gustavo gestured to a chair for Fernanda and sat across from her. "So, Miss Mendonça, how can I assist you today?" he asked, not looking up from the documents he was flipping through distractedly. I'm interested in high-yield investment options to diversify the capital of New Dawn Farm, Fernanda replied firmly. We have a substantial amount available and would like to explore secure alternatives in the financial market. Gustavo looked up, finally making eye contact. A subtle, almost imperceptible smile formed on his lips. I see. And what amount are we talking about? He asked, his tone betraying disbelief. Initially 50 million, Fernanda replied casually, as if discussing the weather. Gustavo's smile widened, turning into an almost mocking expression. Miss Mendonça, perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. The National Progress Bank primarily serves large businessmen and corporations. Our client profile usually... Usually what, Mr. Aragon? Fernanda interrupted, maintaining her composure but with a challenging glint in her eyes. Usually has an established financial history in the market, he finished, adjusting his tie. Our investment products require significant minimum contributions and a sophisticated investor profile. Fernanda took a deep breath, controlling the indignation growing within her. Calmly, she opened her folder and slid some documents across the table. Here's the consolidated financial statement of New Dawn Farm for the last 3 years, along with our projections for the next 5 years, she said, keeping her tone professional. As you can see, our annual revenue exceeds 100 million, with a consistent profit margin above 30%. Gustavo picked up the papers with evident disinterest, flipping through them quickly without paying real attention. His gaze returned to the tablet in his hands. Interesting, but agriculture is a very volatile sector. A drought or a pest outbreak, and all this profit could vanish, he commented with an air of superiority. Perhaps more regional institutions could offer products better suited to your profile. The condescending tone hit Fernanda like a slap. She had faced prejudice before, but never so explicitly in a professional setting. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. I see. And what exactly is my profile, Mr. Aragon? The banker adjusted his Italian-made glasses and shrugged. Farmers usually don't understand the complexity of the financial market. Our products require a certain refinement, he said, completely ignoring the impressive numbers in the documents before him. Maybe start with something simpler, like a business savings account. Fernanda gathered her documents with dignity. Years of negotiating with international buyers and large corporations had taught her when a battle wasn't worth fighting. Thank you for your time, Mr. Aragon, she said, standing up. Fortunately, there are financial institutions that look beyond appearances. Gustavo seemed momentarily disconcerted by Fernanda's restrained reaction. He had expected indignation, perhaps even an emotional outburst that would confirm his prejudices about rural people. Her self-control unsettled him. As you wish, Miss Mendonça, he replied, also standing. Leave your contact with my secretary if you change your mind about our suggestions. As she left the imposing bank building, Fernanda felt the weight of humiliation on her shoulders. It wasn't the first time her capabilities had been questioned because of her rural background, but something about this encounter had struck a nerve. Inside her jeep, she allowed herself a few minutes of frustration before starting the engine. In the rearview mirror, she watched the mirrored facade of the National Progress Bank, standing tall against the Billings skyline. An idea began to form in her mind. During the drive back to the farm, she made 2 important calls, one to her lawyer, Paul Richardson, and another to her college friend, Camila Santos, who worked as a financial analyst in Chicago. The plan taking shape in her mind was bold, perhaps even insane, but the seed had been planted. Louisa immediately noticed something was off when Fernanda returned home. Her daughter had always been reserved about her feelings, but Louisa knew that determined expression well. What happened at the meeting? She asked, pouring a glass of freshly made cashew juice. Fernanda took a long sip before answering. I was treated like an ignorant country girl, Mom. The manager barely looked at the documents I brought. He assumed that because I'm a woman and a farmer, I wouldn't understand finance. Louisa shook her head, indignant but not surprised. And what are you going to do? A cryptic smile appeared on Fernanda's face. Something Dad would call crazy, but it might change everything. In the following weeks, Fernanda practically moved into her office at the farm. While continuing to oversee the harvest and daily operations, she spent sleepless nights researching, crunching numbers, and participating in video conferences with her newly formed team: Paul Richardson, her trusted lawyer; Camila Santos, now officially her financial consultant; and Rafael Cardoso, a mergers and acquisitions specialist Camila had recommended. What had started as an idea born from indignation gradually turned into a concrete and ambitious plan. Fernanda wanted to buy the National Progress Bank. Initially, the proposal seemed absurd to everyone on the team. The bank was a traditional institution with decades of history and powerful connections. But as they delved deeper into their analysis, they discovered interesting information. The National Progress Bank wasn't as solid as it appeared. Although still profitable, it struggled to adapt to the digital market and was gradually losing ground to more modern competitors. Additionally, the Montero family, the bank's main shareholders for 3 generations, faced internal disputes that weakened their position. "The timing is perfect," Rafael explained during a video call. "Rumors about internal issues have already affected the stock price, which has dropped 15% in the last 6 months. If we act quickly, we can initiate a hostile takeover." Hostile? Fernanda questioned. Despite her determination, she had never been one for unnecessary confrontations. "Technical term," Camila clarified with a smile. "It just means we'll make an offer directly to the shareholders, without needing approval from the board." Fernanda agreed, but had one condition: the operation had to be absolutely discreet. She didn't want her name appearing on any documents until it was unavoidable. To achieve this, they created a holding company, FM Investments, which would be the official vehicle for the acquisition. The plan required substantially more resources than Fernanda had initially planned to invest. Even with all the farm's available capital, she would need partners. That's when Luisa surprised everyone by revealing that Antonio, ever the prudent man, had left a substantial life insurance policy, conservatively invested over the years and never touched. "Your father always said this money was for when a unique opportunity arose," Luisa said, emotional. "I think he would approve." With the additional capital and the strategic partnership of some regional farmers, longtime friends of the Mendonça family who trusted Fernanda's business acumen, the operation gained momentum. In 2 months of intense and secretive work, FM Investments had acquired 23% of the bank's shares, becoming the second largest individual shareholder. The move didn't go unnoticed in the financial market. Rumors began circulating about who was behind the mysterious holding. Some speculated it was a major international bank preparing to enter the American market. Others bet on an Asian investment fund. No one suspected that the mastermind was a farmer from Montana. Tension rose when the Montero family, sensing the threat, began buying back shares to strengthen their position. The price soared, making each new acquisition more expensive and risky. Fernanda's team knew they needed a decisive move to secure control. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Ricardo Montero, heir of the 3rd generation and current chairman of the board, was going through a messy divorce that threatened to divide his personal assets, including his block of bank shares. Desperate for liquidity to settle an out-of-court agreement with his ex-wife, he was willing to negotiate his 18% stake in a private transaction. "This is our chance," Paul said during an emergency meeting. "With these shares, we surpass 40% and practically secure control." The negotiation was tense and exhausting. Ricardo, despite his personal pressures, was an experienced and shrewd negotiator. After 3 days of back and forth, they finally reached an agreement, a price 12% above market value, with immediate payment. The signing of the contract, transferring Ricardo Montero's shares to FM Investments, took place in a discreet office in Chicago. Only at the final moment, when the documents were presented for signing, did Fernanda reveal her identity as the true president of the holding. The look of surprise on Ricardo's face was priceless. "You? The farmer from Montana?" he stammered, incredulous. Fernanda smiled serenely, extending her hand to finalize the deal. "Exactly. Sometimes, Mr. Montero, appearances can be deceiving. The next morning, the news exploded in the American financial market. A farmer from Montana had become the largest shareholder of the traditional National Progress Bank. The story quickly made headlines in major economic newspapers with titles ranging from incredulous to sensational. Farmer conquers the financial market. From field to bank, the silent revolution of Fernanda Mendonça. In Billings, inside the imposing mirrored bank building, the atmosphere was one of bewilderment and apprehension. Employees whispered in the hallways, executives held closed door. Meetings, trying to understand how this had happened and, more importantly, what would come next. Gustavo Aragon, the manager who had belittled Fernanda months earlier, frantically searched his files, trying to remember exactly what he had said during that fateful meeting. Fernanda's first official visit as the majority shareholder caused a stir in the main lobby. Unlike before, she was received with reverence by the same receptionist who had barely noticed her previously. She was immediately escorted to the president's office, where she met Eduardo Vasconcelos, a 60-year-old man who had led the bank for over 2 decades. "Miss Mendonça, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," he said, standing to greet her with a tense smile. "I must admit, you caught us by surprise." "That was the intention, Mr. Vasconcelos," Fernanda replied cordially, but with determination in her eyes. "I believe we have much to discuss about the future of this institution." The meeting that followed was a clash of visions. Eduardo, representing the traditional conservatism of the banking system, tried to convince Fernanda that abrupt changes would be harmful. She, in turn, presented concrete data about market losses and the urgent need for modernization. "The bank is losing young clients every day, Mr. Vasconcelos. Our digital presence is practically non-existent compared to competitors, and our internal processes are archaic," she argued, showing graphs on her tablet. "We need a revolution, not cosmetic adjustments." By the end of the meeting, it was clear their visions were irreconcilable. A week later, during a tense board meeting, Fernanda used her voting power to approve a complete restructuring of the executive team. Eduardo Vasconcelos was removed with a generous severance package, and Camila Santos, Fernanda's friend and financial consultant, was appointed the new CEO of the bank. The transition wasn't smooth. Behind the scenes, the financial market buzzed with criticism of the country bumpkin invasion of traditional banking. Articles questioned the ability of a simple farmer to lead a complex financial institution. Some conservative clients, resistant to change, began transferring their accounts to other banks. The situation worsened when, during an internal audit, Camilla and her team discovered serious irregularities in loans granted to shell companies, all linked to the same business group. The scheme, which had drained millions from the bank's coffers in recent years, involved 2 directors from the previous management, including Felipe Martins, the operations director, who had been retained as a gesture of continuity. The discovery created a dilemma for Fernanda. Making the case public would deal a devastating blow to the bank's already shaky reputation. Covering it up would be ethically unacceptable and potentially illegal. After consulting her lawyer, she opted for a transparent but controlled approach. The involved directors were quietly removed, the irregular loans were renegotiated, and rigorous preventive measures were implemented to avoid future misconduct. Internally, Fernanda and Camilla's management faced resistance from long-time employees, especially mid-level managers who felt their positions threatened by the changes. Subtle boycotts of new procedures, project sabotage, and leaks of confidential information to the press became frequent. The organizational climate deteriorated rapidly. Amid the crisis, a tempting offer emerged. The International Financial Group, IFG, a foreign conglomerate with a strong presence in Latin America, offered to buy all of Fernanda's shares at a 40% premium. It was an opportunity to exit the conflict with substantial profit and return to the relative tranquility of farm management. For days, Fernanda wrestled with the decision. The IFG offer represented financial security and an end to a draining conflict. On the other hand, it meant abandoning the transformation project she had barely begun to implement. The decision came after a revealing conversation with her mother, Louisa, as they walked through the fields at sunset. "When your father started, with that small plot, many laughed at him," Louisa said, pointing to the horizon where hundreds of productive acres now stretched. "They said he was crazy, that he'd never compete with the big players. But he believed the land has its own time, that if you plant wisely and patiently, the harvest will come." Fernanda understood the message. The next morning she informed her team that the IFG offer had been declined. The National Progress Bank would remain under her leadership, and the reforms would be intensified. The turnaround began with a bold decision. Instead of fighting internal resistance, Fernanda decided to initiate a complete renewal of the organizational culture. She launched an incentivized retirement program for older employees and began an aggressive recruitment campaign focused on young talent from rural America, particularly agricultural regions. "We want professionals who understand both the financial market and the economic reality of the real America," she explained at a press conference. "People who don't just look at computer screens, but understand the sweat behind the GDP." Simultaneously, the bank underwent a technological revolution. Camilla led the implementation of advanced digital systems, streamlined bureaucratic processes, and launched an innovative app specifically for agribusiness, integrating banking services with farm management tools, weather forecasts, and commodity price tracking. The strategy was clear: transform the National Progress Bank into the go-to financial institution for American agribusiness, a sector that, despite its economic importance, had traditionally been underserved by major banks. The results weren't immediate. For the first 6 months, the numbers continued to decline, fueling criticism and pessimism in the market. But gradually, the new direction began to show its value. Farmers, attracted by financial products tailored to their needs and by customer service that finally understood them, began transferring their accounts to the bank. Agribusiness startups found in the institution a partner willing to fund innovation without the traditional red tape. A year after the acquisition, the National Progress Bank presented its first positive results under the new management: a 15% growth in its customer base, a 30% reduction in operational costs, and most importantly, a significant increase in user satisfaction. The story of the farmer who revolutionized a bank became a case study in business schools. 3 years had passed since that first visit to the bank. On a golden evening, Fernanda gazed at Billings from the top floor of the Progress Building, the bank's new headquarters inaugurated that month. The modern construction combined contemporary elements with sustainable materials typical of the American Midwest, symbolizing the fusion of innovation and tradition that had become the hallmark of her leadership. The National Progress Bank, now affectionately called the Farmers' Bank by its clients, had become the 5th largest financial institution in the country and the absolute leader in agribusiness financing. Its quiet revolution had inspired other institutions to rethink their practices and pay more attention to rural America. Louisa, who had initially resisted the idea of her daughter splitting her time between the farm and the bank, had become an enthusiastic supporter of the project. At 68, she chaired the Antonio Mendonça Foundation, the bank's social arm that brought financial education and technical support to small farmers. "Thinking about it all, it hardly feels like 3 years have passed," Camilla remarked, joining Fernanda in admiring the city. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday when that manager looked at me like I was some lost country girl," Fernanda replied with a tranquil smile. "Other times it feels like I've lived several lives since then." The celebration that evening marked not only the inauguration of the new headquarters, but also the launch of the Seeds of the Future program, an ambitious initiative offering microloans and technical assistance to women entrepreneurs in rural areas across America. The project was particularly special to Fernanda. It embodied the values that had guided her journey from the start. Among the ceremony's guests was Gustavo Aragon. After a sincere apology years earlier, he had excelled at the Industrial District branch, developing innovative financial products for small businesses. His professional transformation led to his appointment as director of the newly created Department of Social Innovation at the bank. "Nervous about the speech?" Camilla asked, discreetly checking her watch. In 15 minutes, the official ceremony would begin. A little, Fernanda admitted, but it's a good kind of nervousness, the kind you feel when you know you're on the right path. The main hall was filled with financial industry personalities, farmers, politicians, and journalists. When Fernanda took the stage, there was a moment of respectful silence before the applause. Here was a woman who had defied stereotypes and transformed a traditionally closed and elitist sector. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her firm voice echoing through the hall. "A little over 3 years ago, I walked into this same bank wearing jeans and a simple shirt, carrying a dream and 50 million to invest. I left humiliated, but with an even greater certainty that a person's worth isn't determined by their clothes, their accent, or their address. It's determined by their vision, their determination, and most importantly, their ability to turn obstacles into opportunities." As she spoke, her eyes met Louisa's in the front row. Her mother smiled with pride, her eyes glistening. "This bank we inaugurate today isn't just a building of glass and concrete. It's a symbol of a new way of thinking about the American financial system. A system that recognizes the value of both rural and urban America, that understands the nation's economic strength lies as much in its bustling cities as in its farthest corners. A system that doesn't ask where you come from but where you want to go." Fernanda went on to detail the vision behind the Seeds of the Future program and the expansion plans for the coming years. As she concluded, she announced a surprise: the creation of the Antonio Mendonça Training Center, a corporate university offering free courses in finance and management for the children of small farmers. The applause was deafening. In the audience, executives from other banks exchanged thoughtful glances. The revolution Fernanda had initiated could no longer be ignored or dismissed as a passing phenomenon. After the ceremony, as she mingled with guests, Fernanda was approached by a distinguished man in his 70s, who introduced himself as Charles Viana, one of the nation's largest investors. "Miss Mendonça, your story is extraordinary," he said with genuine admiration. "Rarely have I seen such a radical and successful transformation of a traditional institution." "Thank you, Mr. Viana. Many doubted a farmer could understand finance." The man smiled knowingly. "You know, I've been underestimated too. I started as a street vendor in rural Montana, and now, well, let's just say I own a few companies." He paused meaningfully. "I'm interested in investing in your Seeds of the Future program. I believe we can expand this concept nationwide." Charles Viana's proposal represented an extraordinary opportunity to amplify the project's impact. Before Fernanda could respond, Louisa approached. "Dear, that journalist from the economic magazine is waiting for your interview," she gently reminded. "Of course, Mom." Fernanda turned to the investor. "Mr. Viana, I'd love to continue this conversation. Can we meet at my office next week?" "Certainly. Your time is valuable, and I've already taken too much of it today." Later, as most guests had left, Fernanda found herself back on the rooftop, gazing at the city lights. Louisa joined her, bringing 2 glasses of sparkling wine. "Your father would be so proud," she said, handing a glass to her daughter. "He always said you had a heart as big as your mind." Fernanda hugged her mother, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability. The journey hadn't been easy. The sleepless nights, the tense meetings, the constant criticism from the press, the attempts at sabotage. It had all demanded a strength she often doubted she possessed. "You know what surprised me most about this journey, Mom?" she reflected as they watched the horizon dotted with lights. "Discovering that deep down, there isn't much difference between running a farm and running a bank. In both cases, you need long-term vision, respect for people, and the wisdom to know when to harvest and when to plant." Louisa smiled, proud of the daughter who had become not just a successful businesswoman, but a woman of strong principles and a generous heart. "And what's the next seed to be planted?" she asked, recognizing the gleam in Fernanda's eyes that signaled new projects in the works. Fernanda's smile lit up with quiet determination. "I'm thinking of creating an investment fund focused exclusively on sustainable businesses in the Midwest, something that encourages projects harmonizing production and environmental preservation." As they discussed the future, a thought crystallized in Fernanda's mind. Her journey had been concrete proof that a person's worth isn't in what they wear or where they come from, but in their ability to turn visions into reality, adversity into opportunity, and prejudice into life lessons. That night, back at the farm, Fernanda drove to the highest point on the property, where she could see the entire expanse of the moonlit fields, the same moonlight her father had gazed at when dreaming of the future of the small plot that would one day become the Mendonça Empire. There, under the starry sky of the Montana plains, Fernanda felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her journey was living proof that prejudice can be overcome, obstacles can become stepping stones, and respect is earned not by surname or appearance, but by integrity and competence. The girl who once helped her mother with daily farm chores had become a visionary leader, bridging the gap between rural and urban America, between tradition and innovation. And the bank that once belittled her was now a symbol of a new era in the American financial system, more inclusive, more human, and more connected to the nation's productive. Reality. Fernanda knew her story was just beginning. There were still many challenges ahead, new prejudices to break, new frontiers to explore. But that night, under the plains' moonlight, she allowed herself to celebrate the path traveled and the lessons learned. The farmer who bought a bank had in truth bought much more, the opportunity to prove that a person's worth should never be judged by appearance or origin, but by the strength of their ideas and the greatness of their dreams.